after.
יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהינו לאבותינו שלא ייראה דבר תקלה על ידי ולא אכשל בדבר הלכה וישמחו בי חבריי שלא אמר על טמא טהור ולא על טהור טמא ולא על מותר אסור ולא אסור מותר ולא ייכשלו חבריי בדבר הלכה ואשמח בהם כי אדוני ייתן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה גל עיניי והביטה נפלאות מתורתך. We learned today, B'ezrat Hashem, in memory of the three who were murdered, unfortunately, on Thursday, and for zechut, for safety. If we want to have peace, and if we can't have peace, let us have safety. And if we can't have safety, I don't know, let us have strength.
We're in trouble.
We are today, B'ezrat Hashem, on the 8th parak of Hilchot Yesodei Hatorah. We are 2 parakim away from pizza. Right? 2 parakim away from B'ezrat Hashem a siyum on this amazing sefer. And we've been talking about Rambam's notions of nevuah, prophecy, and again to remind us that my reading of this, and I am totally convinced that I'm right. Not just that it's my opinion, but I love my opinions.
How much do you love yours?
The Gemara says that
not the only one.
So I'll give you 3 sources here. The Gemara says. I can't remember which Masechta. I apologize. Says that
food?
No. The Gemara says that when a rabbi comes up with a shita with a chidush and he gives it over and over again and the Gemara says we love our own chidushim because they're our own, right? So I love my own chidushim because it's my chidush, right? Carl Jung, twice 2 weeks back to back, we're mentioning Carl Jung, your landsman, Gabriel.
Yeah.
Carl Jung said that basically Jews could not be psychoanalyzed because our minds are too programmed to, we're too conditioned, too connected to our ways of thinking to be psychoanalyzed, which is very interesting because Hitler says the same thing in Mein Kampf. He says that propaganda works everywhere except with Jews because he says the Jew can never be separated from his opinions. So halavai, we should, cling to truth and not to opinion.
Is it an opinion or a belief?
Huh?
A belief?
I believe the quote from Hitler is opinions. But belief is also not truth, right? Belief is a way of getting through the day, right? So let us, I'm very blessed to be here with a room full of guys who come here every week, actually trying to get deeper into looking at the truth, and I think that's a tremendous chud for me to be a part of this. So I thank you all.
Amen.
So the 8th parak. So the first 4 parakim talk about the structure of the cosmos. The 5th parak talks about sin and death, which really takes us from the creation of the cosmos into Gan Eden and Adam and Chava. The 6th parak talks about the destruction of the divine name, which takes us into the story of Cain and Hevel. The 7th parak introduced us to the notion of prophecy, which takes us to Avraham Avinu. This 8th parak now takes us to Moshe Rabbeinu. And as we shall see, B'ezrat Hashem, the 9th parak takes us to Matan Torah, to the Aseret HaDibrot, and the 10th parak takes us beyond to Torah Sheba'al Peh, to what we're doing here. Because as the Gemara says, we are part of Matan Torah. Right? The Gemara at the beginning of Brachot, I think it's Daf Chet, but I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, says that, Matan Torah, it's an ongoing process. That there was the Luchot,
and then they were receiving.
And giving, and this, again, it's beautiful. Like the Hasidim, so B'ezrat Hashem soon will be Shavuot, right? Which we say is Man Matan Toratenu. But the Hasidish greeting on Shavuot is not Matan Torah. It's a Guten Kabbalah Torah. That we should be Mekabel the Torah. It's like if God gives us the Torah and we're not Mekabel, then what happens,
What's
right?
Mekabel?
To receive, to accept, right? So it's not about Matan Torah. It's about Kabbalah Torah. It's about receiving and accepting the Torah. But so we got to be here, Hayom. We got to be standing up for it.
But to talk about the idea of receiving, one of the things I think we learn from Torah is that, and this isn't a criticism, but the giver has to give to the receiver in a way the receiver could best receive.
This is, an ongoing struggle that, I see this clearly in the pages of the Torah and throughout Tanakh. is that it's like, if you just read it as a book, right? God can't always figure out how to get the message across to us. God is always saying, what, you did what? I can't believe it. What? Didn't you know? Don't you know what God says?
Just to say, could there be another way?
Right. God says the kind. You don't know better than that. You did what? You killed your brother? God says, well, you never told me. Yeah. Good. Gewalt. So, Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet, the culmination of the prophetic revelations that God shows.
The Arabs want to steal away from. They want to say there's a greater prophet.
Yeah,
That's what the Arabs do.
It's okay. Okay, so the first paragraph. This parak consists of only 3 paragraphs, but they're long and they're very, very dense. Moshe Rabbeinu, לא האמינו בו ישראל מפני האותות שעשה. שהמאמין על פי האותות יש בליבו דופי. שאפשר שיעשה האות בלט וחישוף. This is Gewalt. This is incredibly important stuff.
Hishuf is very strange.
Moshe Rabbeinu, he says that the Bnei Israel, we do not believe in Moshe because he did all of these miracles and wonders and gave all these signs and stuff. Because he says anybody who believes in something based on signs and wonders, he said that's actually, that's foolishness. He says because they could be doing magic. They could be doing tricks. You know, you can do magic or sorcery. And we're not going to go into what Rambam and Ramban, for example, their discussion about whether there is such a thing as magic, is not such a thing as magic. We might be able, and maybe I'll give a share on that some other time if everybody's really interested in it. But okay, but he says it's possible. Maybe they did it with some kind of sorcery or magic, smoke and mirrors, right? כל האותות שעשה משה במדבר לפי הצורך עשה. This is incredibly important. All of the miracles, the signs, whatever you want to call them, that Moshe did out in the Midbar, they were done for specific needs. לא להביא ראיה על הנבואה, not to bring proof that he was a Navi. היה צריך להשקיע את המצרים, קרע את הים. They needed to drown the Egyptians, so they split the sea. Amazing. Okay? צרכנו למזון, הוריד לנו את המן. We were hungry, we needed food. God and Moshe brought down the man. צמאו, בקע להם את האבן. We were thirsty, Moshe split the rock, and out came the water.
You know, we try to find out how many complaints could we have with that manna, please?
Right? כפרו בו עדת קורח, בלעה אותן הארץ. Korach and his buddies all stood up and tried to attack Moshe. They did a little miracle. The earth opened up and swallowed them up. So everything, and he says all of this applies to all of these other seeming miracles that Moshe did in the Midbar. They were not to show that he was the Navi.
So he's saying
they were things that were required to happen for us to survive.
He's trying to say that Moshe was responsible for all these miracles, not Hashem. What?
Interesting question.
He's a messenger.
כל האותות שעשה משה במדבר, לפי הצורך עשה. All of the wonders that Moshe did in the Midbar, he did them because there was a need. Okay.
As determined by whom?
Well, you can read in the text, right? In the text we say, we're thirsty. Moshe says, the people are thirsty. God says, hit the rock. So
it's God, it's not Moshe.
Well, it's an interesting point that you raise because we're looking at this from a different perspective today, from the perspective that we had 3,500 years ago when we were marching through the desert. 3,500 years ago, we barely had a consciousness of ourselves as a distinct entity, as a people or as a nation, right? We don't consider ourselves a nation. Who calls us a nation? Paro, right? The first person who uses the term Am Yisrael is Paro. We are just this bunch of people slinging through the mud, wishing that we didn't have to do all this every day and make bricks without straw. And then comes along this Moshe guy who schleps us out. The Egyptians throw us out. It's not so clear that we wanted to leave. We get out. We say, and it's like now we're hungry, we're thirsty. When we were in Mitzrayim, at least we knew what we did when we got up in the morning and we had watermelon. And now we're hungry and thirsty. So, from our, and it's a very important point that you're raising, because what Rambam is talking about here is, from our perspective, what does it mean that Moshe did all these wonders? And he's saying Moshe didn't do this to convince us that he was the Navi. We needed to get rid of the Egyptians. What's the best way to get rid of the Egyptians? Lure them into the sea and then drown them. We needed to eat. However many, 2.5 million people, however many, 3 million people we were when we came out of Mitzrayim. How do you feed all those people out in the desert where you don't have fruit trees?
No refrigerator.
You give them manna, right? We needed to drink. How do you give 3 million?
Moshe says to these slaves in Egypt that Hashem is going to help them.
Right.
So how can you say that he's responsible for all of these?
I think it's a very good point that you're raising. And I think Rambam is doing this very deliberately. He's saying that this is like, we're looking at Moshe and we're saying, oh, look at this amazing miracle that Moshe did. And what he's saying is that, because again, he's talking about in the context of prophecy. And we'll get to in a moment how, which he goes through at much greater length and much more complexity in the Modern Nevuchim, in the Guide for the Perplexed, about the relationship, our relationship to Moshe and Moshe to God, and our relationship to that phenomenon of prophecy. But let's just say, B'kitzur, that the purpose of the miracles was not to convince us. And let's put aside for a moment, God did the miracles, Moshe did it. I mean, if God wanted to do these miracles in the context in which we see them, I think it's clear that in order for these things to happen, there needed to be a tzorech, there needed to be a need. And the need is created when we, Am Yisrael, are out of our bondage and we're wandering around and we don't know what to do. And wandering around not knowing what to do, we need a strong leader. And that leader is Moshe. And that leader waves his stick, and all of a sudden a rock opens up and there's enough water for 3 million people to drink, right? So we're saying, oh, you see, he waved the stick, that means he's the leader. And Rambam is saying, no. That was the only way to get the water to all the people.
Right? But Hashem told him, that's the way you're going to get water. He told him it.
I'm not going to argue with Rambam here. Rambam is I think, is painting this picture from the perspective of, we're sitting in the desert, we're looking at Moshe. Moshe does what looks to us like he's doing a miracle. We don't see God. We don't talk to God. Only Moshe talks to God. And that's what we're going to come to in just a moment. That's how Hashem.
Yesh Hashem b'kivbenu.
Right? God just took us out of, just split the sea and took us out and drowned all the Egyptians, and we look around and say, where's God? Where's God? Where's God now that we really need God? Right? And that failure of not even a failure of emunah. It's like we're not even ready for emunah at that point, right? And I think, shameless plug, if you read the chapter in my book about Kriyat Yam Suf, right? That seeing is believing. Vayar Yisrael. And we see this every morning, by the way, right? That we saw what Moshe did, and we saw the dead Egyptians, and then we believed, right? And it's very problematic, because we need to see something in order to believe it. The minute that we don't see it anymore, we stop believing it, which is what Yaakov was just saying, right? We saw God, we saw the sea split, we saw the Egyptians die, and then it's done. Now we say, oh, wait, God? You left? We're not even at a level of being able to have anything resembling faith, much less to sustain it.
But I think another way to look at that is how, and something that can be seen and is somewhat measurable, and that is how big of a portion does Moshe take on, and what might we do in the context of that?
A portion.
So what is,
how much
Moshe,
responsibility does he take on?
But what is his what is he hoping for at the end of the day? And if we want to say Moshe is our leader, which we do, so we have to look at that in relation, what is our hope and expectation in relation to what are we capable of doing. So Moshe is supposed to be at the 49th gate, or at the 49th lowest gate, but he was at the upper gate, wasn't he?
Okay. If you say so, I'm not so.
Did-
I'm not arguing that. It's
Okay,
not my
so
not my
this is what I
thing. But
mean.
okay.
So that becomes our benchmark. Moshe, in terms of what, his arms get tired, holding
Right.
them up and all. But what is he really trying to do? And no one questions his sincerity, I don't think.
Except Korach.
Well, Korach is a populist. They can't help
Oh,
themselves.
good, but I agree, and at the same time, I would say the same thing that I just said to Benish, which is we're looking at Moshe's leadership now from our perspective. Baruch Hashem, sitting in
what is humanly
liberated
possible?
Yerushalayim. No, but sitting in Yerushalayim, we have the perspective to be able to. I mean, we're talking about people at a time in our history where we don't even have a notion of human capacity, of human ability.
Okay.
All we know is a strong leader. Right? When we were in Mitzrayim, we were led around, we were slaves. Now we have a leader, and we depend on that leader for everything. When we were slaves, we didn't have to say, I would like a sandwich. At 9 o'clock in the morning, we got our sandwich, period. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we got our sandwich, period. And that was it. So everything was planned for us, was regimented for us, was regulated for us. We didn't even know, I'm suffering, I'm unhappy, I'm hungry, I want to be out, I want to be here. We didn't even know. And if you look at the Haggadah, which we just read a few weeks ago, right? It juxtaposes the passages from the Sefer Shemot, from the book of Exodus, with Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, which tell the same story in very, very different ways. In the book of Exodus, it says the children of Israel groaned and moaned and whined because of all of the hard work they were doing. And in Deuteronomy, we say, my ancestors, we prayed to God we didn't pray to God. If you look in Sefer Shemot, we're not praying to God. The words that are used to express what we did, none of those words actually expresses language. It's moaning, groaning, whining, crying out, but not speaking, and definitely not praying. But we reprocess that from a new perspective in the time that's foretold in the book of Deuteronomy, the time of the Mishkan of the Beit HaMikdash, right? In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, that's foretold that we'll be here, and then we'll come to the Kohen and we'll say our ancestors, right? So you could say that it's a necessary retelling of history because, thank you.
Amen.
Because we have to.
אחרי מות קדושים. No.
Anyway, so I thought maybe we could even finish this parak today, but you never know. It's all good. It's all good. So, and so, what is the source of our belief in Moshe? מעמד הר סיני שאיננו ראו ולא זר, ואוזנינו שמעו ולא אחר. האש והקולות והלפידים, והוא ניגש אל הערפל והקול מדבר אליו. ואנו שומעים. So what's the basis of our belief in Moshe Rabbeinu? That at Mount Sinai, our eyes saw, us, not somebody else. Our ears heard, not somebody else. And there was fire and thunder and lightning, and Moshe went and he entered into the thick clouds, and he went up, and the voice spoke to him. And then we heard, right? ושומעים, משה, לך אמור להן כך וכך. וכן הוא אומר, פנים בפנים דיבר השם עמכם. And we heard the voice saying, Moshe, go tell the people so and so and so and so and so and so, right? And in Moreh Nevuchim, he expounds on this. He says, the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, are voiced in the second person singular, right? Lo
אשר הוצאתיך.
Asher hotzeticha, right? The kaved et avicha v'et imecha. Not kabdu. It's not plural. It's not all of you do this, right? And so there's a famous midrash that like when Moshe went up and God started to talk, and we said I can't take it. I'm going to die if I have to listen to this. Moshe, you go and listen and come and tell us what God said. And Rambam and that's right. That's a response to the text, because the text is voiced in second person singular, right?
Meaning you?
Meaning you, singular, right? So Rambam says, yes, when Moshe went up, and that's why it's voiced in second person singular, that God was speaking to Moshe and saying, I command you. And now you take this command and you spread it to all of Bnei Israel. You tell everybody. And so here he's saying that in kind of condensed form.
Did he speak to Moshe or to us singularly?
So you want to pull out a Chumash and look up the Aseret HaDibrot, right? Kaved et avicha v'et imecha. Shmor et
Speaks to
Hashem.
me,
Yeah.
not to Moshe.
No, but in the moment, the conversation was between God and Moshe. We weren't there. We said, like the Midrash says, responding to the grammatical structure of the text. The Midrash says, why is it second person singular?
He was speaking to me, but I was escaping.
One way of looking at it, Rambam says God was speaking to Moshe,
Okay.
and Moshe's job was to come down and tell us, and we knew that was going on. So we didn't question the validity of Moshe's nevuah, right? Meaning, so now from our perspective today, maybe we look back and we say, oh, Moshe, like he struck the rock and water came out. It's like, oh, all these miracles that he did. But Rambam is saying, we shouldn't think that at the moment we needed Moshe to do miracles for us to understand. He's not talking about the miracle as proof of God's involvement or not. What he's saying is that the miracle was not seen by us at the time as evidence of Moshe's stature as a prophet. We already knew that because we saw Moshe go up the mountain and we heard God speaking to him.
But this was also a miracle.
I don't think that was a miracle.
What's that?
The revelation at Har Sinai? That's not a miracle. That's a once in cosmic history event. Miracle is like when the laws of nature do something that we don't expect, right?
Yeah, but for 3 million people to hear that at the same time, I think that's a miracle.
I have
Was
a more
there technology?
I have maybe a more restrictive definition of miracle in my mind. If God comes down from the sky and talks to me, that's not a miracle. That's God talking to me. When God says to Abraham, "Kach na'et bincha," that's not a miracle. That's God talking to Abraham. When God sits down on top of Har Sinai and says, "Ani Hashem Elokecha," that's not a miracle. That's God talking to us. It's a unique and cosmic history event that we were capable of hearing the message at that time. Right?
But the inevitable talking to the finite, you don't find a miracle? It's not an ordinary occurrence.
But for it not to be an ordinary occurrence, that in my mind, that's not. Miracles are a separate category. Miracles are perhaps on a lower level than that. It's in like common speech, I would say it's a miraculous event. But when we're talking about what I would consider like, trying to use as a term of art, miracle, right? Splitting the sea was a miracle. And then there's also, the Midrash about the 10 things that were created. Last, Erev Shabbat Ben Hashmashot, on the last day of creation, the 6th day, right? And the 10 things, which include like the pit and the cleft in the rock where Moshe hid, and Bilam's donkey and all that stuff, right? And so the reason that the Chazal gave of why it was important for those things to be created ahead of time was God really doesn't like doing miracles. So instead of saying, God did a miracle and Bilam's donkey started talking, God said, okay, I've had you around since the 6th day of creation. This is the moment where I need you. And God pulls the donkey out. Because miracles is very problematic. I think when we see miracles, as he's saying, that all these miracles are done for tzorech, for a specific need that cannot be fulfilled otherwise. You can't give water to 3 million people in the desert unless you have a miraculous source. You can't feed 3 million people in the desert unless you have the man fall, unless you have a miraculous source. Am I making sense? So, so miracle is when God does something that completely upsets the rules of the laws of nature because nothing else will suffice.
But what about when the miracle keeps on being pondered for thousands of years by future generations?
Which miracle is that?
Kriyat
Yam Suf, for example.
Pick
Right.
anyone.
Okay.
So That is not an ordinary event. You don't say, well, the weather was this on this day, and 5,000 years later we're still talking about
Right.
the weather event.
You know, I think one of the issues you have is the audience that's defining the miracle. For a secular society that is trying to find an answer other than Hashem, to be able to classify an event as a miracle is easier for them to grasp than recognizing the fact that Hashem actually did something. Because then they're faced with the reality of having to face the idea that he exists and that they're part of this order that they've been rebelling against.
So what did they believe in?
So you don't think the order is a
It's
miracle?
not for the man, for the Miriam.
It
for
depends on your
the sea.
perspective.
So what for?
Oh, okay. What did they believe in? So again, Rambam is saying that the purpose of these miracles, Kriyat Yam Suf, Be'er Miriam, all these things, the man, the purpose of the miracles was not. Maybe I didn't express it explicitly enough. Okay, succinctly enough. The purpose of the miracles was not to demonstrate Moshe's prowess as a prophet or his stature as a prophet. The purpose of the miracles was that there was a need in the moment, and God said, there's no other way to fill this need except I'm going to wave my hand and split the sea. I'm going to wave my hand and bring down the man, right? How we perceive them is, so Rambam is, I think he's saying, we shouldn't think that the purpose of the miracles was to convince us that either that God is in charge or that Moshe is his great prophet, right? We know that God's in charge, and we know that Moshe is a prophet. How did we know? Because we saw him go up on Har Sinai, and we heard God say, okay, Moshe, come here, I have a message for you. And then he came down and he gave us over the message. And the message is recorded in the Torah, and it's interesting that it's recorded in second person singular, you, not all of you, right? Ata and lo, and not atem, right? And what we take from that is, this is the words that God spoke directly to Moshe. And these commands were given to Moshe. And Moshe came and gave them over to us. So there's, interestingly, a chain of transmission.
The chain of
transmission, right? Which is, I think, consistent, now I think about it, it's consistent with the way that Rambam describes the transmission of Torah at the beginning of his introduction to his commentary in the Mishnah. Where he talks about how the Torah was transmitted, that Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, Yoshua, and Moshe received the Torah, gave it over, and he goes through this whole elaborate description of Moshe sitting in the tent, and Aaron comes in and he gives him the Torah, and then Aaron's sons come in and they give him the Torah, and then the Zikanim come in, they give him the Torah, and then the people come in, and so each group hears the whole Torah over like 4 times. From Moshe and from Yehoshua and from Aaron and from Aaron's sons and from the
transmission of information.
Transmission of
But we're not in agreement many times on what the information is.
Well, that's as we have discussed in the past. I think that is one of the things that Rambam challenges us on.
Yeah.
It's problematic because he says the purpose of, and again, remember, like Rambam says that God told Moshe, Moshe told Yehoshua, and Moshe, and then Moshe and Yehoshua told Aaron, and then Moshe and Yehoshua and Aaron told Aaron's sons, and then Moshe and Yehoshua and Aaron's sons told the Zikanim, and passed it down, and then he says we all started teaching Torah to each other. Okay, so there's kind of a philosophical opposition of Rambam versus the Gaonim. That the Gaonim, and again, I'm kind of oversimplifying, but it's pretty. I think it's pretty clear historically. The Gaonim, and I think it also feeds into the political economic structure of the great academies, right? That in order to run a yeshiva, you need money. In order to get money, at a certain point, you need to have a shita that people are not going to find too troubling, or too radical, or too out there, or that it upsets their view of reality too much, because otherwise they're going to lose customers, right? Interesting.
You only need one big one.
No, well, I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine. It's like a very brilliant academic, a from guy, the other day. But you heard this tempest in the Chinik about about Hadar, Yeshivat Hadar. that they posted on their website about, the people want to apply to come and learn there, and they said something about, a person has 2 Jewish parents.
Should it be allowed?
Right? No, they said a person has 2 Jewish parents, and then people got all upset because, I thought, we were inclusive and, open-minded, and I was saying, well, how can you insist that somebody have 2 Jewish parents? It's like, whatever. And it's, it's like if you alien, and my friend is like he's an academic, he's a professor, he's not a doesn't teach in yeshiva, but he's senior faculty at Schechter, and he said it's like they're afraid to take a stand. Like you get these rabbis who are like they're teaching in these open-minded yeshivot where men and women learn together, and then they're afraid to say something like, I would not officiate at an interfaith marriage, right? And it's not even that they're afraid to say, like, it's not that they're afraid to say, how could you possibly marry a non-Jew? I'm going to sit shiva, I'm going to cut your head off. They wouldn't even just say something like, well, I'm not comfortable about that. Because the minute you even say something mild, right? I'm not really that comfortable with it. What? You're so close-minded, you're evil, right? The next thing you know, you're losing funding because now the people who are signing up and paying tuition aren't signing up and paying tuition anymore because they don't like your hashkafa, right? So there was that already in the times of the great academies, they were getting funded by the community.
But you have to go according to what halacha is.
Okay, but this is exactly what we're saying. Halacha.
It's controversial.
But I'm saying the discussion or the confrontation, if you will, between Rambam's view of Torah and the monolithic view of Torah that came from the academies of the Gaonim was that Torah comes down, and because there's so many different Jews, we each have our own slightly different understanding of the same words, and that's why when you learn the Gemara, you have a Mishnah, and then you have all these Braitot. You have different texts that address the same halacha concept, right? And sometimes you look at the Gemara and you say, well, sometimes even the Gemara says, I don't understand why Rabbi chose this to put into the Mishnah when this Braita makes a lot more sense, right? So the Gaonim took the attitude or took the view that there's only one right halacha, and the job of learning Gemara is to ultimately exclude and get rid of all the other ones that have it wrong and go all the way back up to the top of Har Sinai and find out what's the right halacha. And Rambam's view is, no, it came down, lo bashamayim, and it comes down, so they're all right. The question is, how do we, the question is, how do we live by this halacha?
Paradox?
Sorry?
Deal with the paradox?
But it's not a paradox. It's like,
If they're all right, it has to be paradox involved.
Not necessarily. I'll give you an example. You have we all went to school, right? Everybody went to school at some point, right? And we all had assignments where the teacher would say, I want you to write an essay about, pick a topic, democracy, marriage, whatever, right? So everybody in the class, you had 20 kids in the class, they all wrote about the same subject, but each one had something different to say about it, right? What did you do on your summer vacation? Well, we all had a summer vacation, but some people went here, some people stayed home, some people went to summer school, some people went to camp, some people had a job, right? So we all have a different experience, but it was all summer vacation, right? So we all accept the Torah, and we all accept the halacha. And I accept the halacha according to my teachers, and according to the way that I've based my life on what I learn, and I continue to study and to question it and to try to grow in it and to try to understand it better, right? If somebody comes along and says to me, you know what, I do it this way, my attitude is I can learn something from that. My attitude is not you're doing it wrong. It's also not I'm doing it wrong. If you look in the Gemara, the rabbis of the Gemara, they don't say, but famously, right, the three-way machlokas about chicken and milk, right? Is it kosher? Is it asur mid'Rabbanan? Is it asur mid'Oraita? Right? And we have this rabbi who says, "Oh yeah, well I went to Shabbos dinner and we had chicken parmesan," right? And the other rabbi doesn't say to him, "What? You treif? I get out of my house." He says, "Oh, you must have gone to Rabbi Yossi ben Galili," right? So the rabbis of the Gemara are much more radical, much more accepting, and had much broader views of the world than an awful lot of from Yidden today. Obviously it doesn't apply to me, but so the clash between Rambam and the Gaonim is the clash of you know, if there's only one way to do things right, there should only be one human being in the world, right? And since there's so many of us, it must mean that we all have like a job to, you know, like the Sfas Emes, I think he says like the Torah is not complete without each one of us doing our utmost to bring our own Torah into the world. If I have to bring my own Torah into the world, it means that my life is going to be a little different from yours. We all accept Shabbos, kosher, you know, tefillah, you know, all this great stuff. But we all have our own approach.
But the extremes can be huge.
They can.
Within that, because the person could say democracy, he could say, I was elected democratically. And then we could have the Democrat who says that, well, it means liberalism. It doesn't mean statism. So when you have that extreme...
We're just talking about halacha, but you're talking about, it's okay. It's all good.
I'm talking about to try to isolate the one
Even
that we could agree with. And that's the ultimate miracle, to even believe there's such a thing, because when you had paganism, you didn't believe in just the one.
Right, everybody had their own gods, and right. And so, minayin shemamad har Sinai levado hi haraya lenevuato shehi emet. And how do we know that the revelation at Har Sinai, that is the definitive proof that Moshe's prophecy is absolutely true? Because it says, Hinei anochi ba elecha be'av ha'anan ba'avur yishma ha'am b'dabri immecha. God says to Moshe, behold, I come to you in a thick cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you, and that they will believe in you forever. Gam b'cha ya'aminu le'olam. Mikral shekodem davar zeh lo ha'eminu bo. Interesting. Because before that happened, we didn't believe in Moshe with an unshakable faith that would last forever, but rather with a faith that left us open to doubt and suspicion. And I think, you know, there's definitely a political side to the story that we read in the Torah, right? Definitely, you know, questions of the legitimacy, if you will, of Moshe's leadership, that people...
I'm the ones who followed him.
Yeah, people are questioning his legitimacy, and then, you know, according to Rambam's reading anyway, after Har Sinai, almost everybody accepts the legitimacy of his leadership, because they say, well, they say he went up there and God spoke to him, so I get it. I mean, the idea is, right, we were all there, we saw God, God came down on top of the mountain, we saw it, we heard God's voice, and we said, I can't take this, and we ran away. We said, Moshe, you go up and then come back and tell us what God said. And he went up and he came back. So we got it. We accept that.
why should this not have been considered magics?
I have to believe, not having seen God myself, at least not that I'm aware of in this Gilgul, I have to believe that when a human being sees God, you know it.
Yeah, but you're not, you can't see him.
In the moment,
I think you know it.
and 10 minutes later,
You can't know for sure.
Didn't their soul leave their body?
According to the Midrash,
Yeah.
According to the Midrash.
That's a
So
pretty
10
dramatic experience.
Yeah, so 10 minutes later, it's because at this time, as you said, right? Because we're still in this state of, you know, what psychologists call object relations, right? That, you know, an infant is very happy as long as the mother's sitting right next to him. The mother gets up and goes out of the room. The infant starts screaming hysterically because the infant believes that the mother ceased to exist. And then the mother comes back and the infant's happy again, right? And the minute walks out, you know. So we're still in that state.
no,
We see God.
the mother's coming back. Did he come back?
But according to this, that's not the issue. The
Isn't
issue
that
is
separation anxiety?
Yeah. So the issue is that we saw God this one time, and we heard God speaking to Moshe. So we know, right? So we knew what all he's talking about is Moshe's status as a Navi, as a prophet. He's saying that we didn't need any reminding. We knew from that one experience that Moshe was the prophet. Yeah.
They, not us.
Well, they, we, them, whatever. Yes. Okay. And
Weren't we all there at that moment?
Apparently, but
Also.
That's what Chazal say. Yep. Okay. Second paragraph. נמצאו אלו ששולח להם הם העדים על נבואתו שהיא אמת. So therefore, those to whom Moshe was sent, meaning us back then or our ancestors, they witnessed his appointment as a prophet, and it wasn't necessary for him to do miracles to convince them of his status as a prophet. So he says, Moshe and they're like two witnesses observing the same event together. Each one is a witness to his colleague that he's telling the truth. And neither brings any other proof to his colleague. Okay, this is a little, okay, let's just read this quickly, right? Similarly, all Israel were witnesses to the appointment of Moshe Rabbeinu at the revelation of Sinai, and it was unnecessary for him to perform any further wonders for them to convince them that he was a Navi. This concept is alluded to in the exchange between God and Moshe at the bush. At the beginning of Moshe's prophecy, God says to him, yes, God gives him the signs, turning the staff into a snake and putting his hand in and, all that stuff. And he says, and you do this and they will listen to your voice. So at that point, like God sends Moshe, and Moshe comes to us and says, Pakod yifkod Hashem Elokim etchem. He uses the magic password, Pakod yifkod, which is what Yosef told his brothers to tell their descendants. And then he does the thing with the stick, and he does the thing with his hand, and now we believe him. Right? But so at that point, Rambam is also, again, very, very, it's consistent with his brilliant insight into human nature, which he lays out in great detail in his introduction to Parashat Mishnayot, right? About the stages of learning, right? That when you go to a little child, you say to a little child, if you memorize this, I'll give you a piece of candy. The child says, great, memorizes the pasuk, and you get the child candy, the child's happy. Because a person with a small mind is made happy by small things, right? And then as the child grows, then they want more things in exchange, right? Then the kid gets a bit older, and you say, well, if you memorize these Mishnayot, I'll buy you a new pair of shoes, or I'll give you a new toy.
Cell
Right?
phone, Tesla.
Then as you get older, they want this and then they want that. And then when they're adults, then they say, well, why are you learning Torah? I'm learning Torah so that people call me Rabbi, so that people call me Chacham, so that I can be a Rosh Yeshiva, so I can be a big important Chashav Rabbi, so I can be on the board of this or the Vada or whatever, right? And he says, all of that's great. And that's all important to bring people along at their level, right? And each one of those is the very definition of what Rambam calls Torah shelo lishma, not for its own sake. So shelo lishma in Rambam's definition is not, I just felt like reading this so I read it. It's when we learn Torah for a specific end other than for the end of just learning Torah. I want to learn Torah so that I can get smicha. I want to learn Torah so that I can, paskin halacha. I want to learn Torah so that people call me Rabbi. I want to learn Torah so that I can wear a big black hat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Make it better.
Okay. So, sorry?
Make a better world.
Get to Rambam.
Make a better world, I would say we're getting close with that. That's close to, I would say that's getting closer to Lishma. Because, right, the Gemara says, what's better, Masim Tovim or Talmud Torah? What's better, doing good deeds or learning Torah? And there's a little bit of back and forth about it, but what's the conclusion? What's the maskana? What the maskana is that Talmud Torah,
you have to learn to make the deed.
that Talmud Torah is better because it leads to Masim Tovim. Right. And if you think that that's sophistry, but the fact is, what's not said in that, but it's, when you think about it, it's obvious, right? Learning Torah brings us to doing good deeds. Doing good deeds does not bring us to learning Torah.
Right.
That's
Right.
what you bump up against, right? So, and that's the whole argument against all these people who think that all you need is tikkun olam, right? Well, I'm a good person. I don't need the Torah. See, I'm a good Jew because I'm a good person. No, you're a good person because you're a good person. You're not a good Jew without the Torah. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You're a very good person. I'll agree to that. I will stipulate to that. You're a very good person, but you're not a good Jew, by definition. Well, how can you say that, right? And here we go all over again. Okay. Moshe Rabbeinu knows that, yes, Moshe understands that one who believes in another person because of signs has apprehensions in mind, has doubts and suspicions. Therefore, Moshe sought to be released from his mission, saying, they won't believe in me. And God said, no, these are signs and wonders, they're only a temporary measure. The thing with the stick and the snake and the hand, and all, it's only temporary. They will, until they left Egypt. And after that, they would stand on this mountain, right? And it's like, remember at the Sinai, at the bush, right? God says to Moshe, and the proof is after you have brought them out of Egypt, you will stand here and serve me on this mountain. That's like proof. From a human perspective, that's not proof. Proof is I want you to show me something now that justifies the situation I'm in today. And what God is saying to Moshe is, no, don't worry. There will be a situation in the future that will justify the position that I'm sending you to tomorrow, right? This is another one of those examples of like, the way the Torah gives us the narrative that it's like God doesn't understand how to communicate to us in a way that we can understand, it seems, right? But maybe there are just some things that are beyond our comprehension until we've lived through them, right?
But as they continue on, as it goes on, you see Miriam and Aaron saying, well, you're no bigger nubby than we are.
Right.
I mean, it's still there.
Right, but and Rambam has referred to that also, right? And God comes to them and says, no, you don't understand. I speak to you, but I speak to you like I speak to other Nevi'im, in dreams and in visions and stuff. Moshe, face to face, as a man with his friend. It's like he and I are sitting on bar stools next to each other and we're talking, right? You guys, I whisper in your ear when you're asleep. You don't understand, right? Which is very interesting because it seems that, and could it be that Aaron and Miriam did not understand the nature of Moshe's nevuah? Could it be? Mm-hmm. Could it be that,
Well, Miriam demonstrates it.
I'm saying, could it be that they... Could it be right? Could it be that? Well, no, they both demonstrate. They both got it. So why does Miriam get punished and Aaron doesn't?
Well, she spoke out and he didn't.
I think they both spoke out.
But I thought she brought it up.
I think that's all apologetics. I think the reason that he does not get punished is because he's the Kohen Gadol, and no matter what, he has to go into the Mishkan and do the avodah every day. And so God says to him, you know what, you deserve what's happening to her, but I need you for the job that you have to do every day, and the people of Israel need you to do that job every day. So you get out of this on a technicality. So like his punishment is living with his guilt and watching his sister suffer the punishment that he should have also suffered.
He would probably rather be in him.
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. I feel so bad for you.
He does so much to help so many people.
But they have different roles as male and female.
Well, they have different roles because he's Kohen Gadol. Male and female is a separate
role.
Okay, so Moshe understands that. He says to God, they're not going to believe in me. God says, don't worry, I'll give you these little fancy little magic tricks you'll do for them and then they'll believe. And he says, yeah, come on, you can't convince people with magic tricks. They won't buy that for long. God says, don't worry, you'll get back here. And indeed, they come back, right? And so this is what he says, that this will be the sign for you, ki anochi shelachticha, that I'm the one who sent you, behotziacha et ha'am mimitzrayim, ta'avdun et Elohim al hahar hazeh. That when you bring the people out of Mitzrayim, you will all come and serve God on this mountain.
Are you saying that at that point Moshe buys it because it's such an unhuman argument that only God would make that argument?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Rambam is telling us that this is the way that this is the progression of, if you will, of
Acceptance.
Of acceptance and of testimonies to Moshe's status as a Navi. Remember, this parak is all about the nevuah of the status of Moshe Rabbeinu as the greatest of the Nevi'im, the greatest prophet, right? So he's saying it's not about the miracles, and at the same time, in order to get us to get together and leave Mitzrayim in the first place, you had to do something to convince us. So God says, yeah, don't worry, you do these great tricks. You'll take your stick, it'll turn into a snake, then you turn it back into a stick, and you wave your hand, it'll get white, it'll get back. And he says, how long is that going to last? God says, don't worry, it gets better. You'll bring them out, and then they'll stand here. And he brings us out, and we stand there. And when we stand there, going back to what he said in the first paragraph here, that's when Moshe goes up the mountain, and we see God come down to the mountain. We hear God talk to us. We hear God calling to Moshe. God says to Moshe, I did this, you do that, I want you to do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. And God, Moshe comes to us and says, here's the message, guys. So we have come a very long way. We needed to be wowed with a little magic trick to get our attention in the first
But
place.
you're saying,
If they did,
that Moshe didn't need convincing at this point when he's standing at the bush?
It took a lot of convincing. Are you kidding me? He keeps on saying, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, I don't want to. And I think maybe at a certain point in the process, the reason he's protesting, he continues to protest, is because he realizes that this is the real deal.
I
First
hear what the next step is.
Yeah, first he says, he comes in, he says, oh, look, here's this bush and it's burning, but it's not being consumed. This is very interesting. And then he hears his voice say, take your shoes off. He takes his shoes off. He says, I wonder what this is. And he's looking at it. And then the voice says to him, you know what? You're the guy I've been looking for. I need you to go back to Mitzrayim and bring all my people out. He says, no, I'm not the guy for that job. He says, no, you're the guy for the job. No, but really, I want you to do this. I'm not very eloquent. I don't speak very well. Well, don't worry about it. We'll send your brother. He'll do it. By the way, notice, right? Moshe, God says to Moshe, Aaron will do all the talking, right? Do we hear Aaron say anything?
No.
The most significant pasuk about Aaron's verbal expression is, we just had a couple of weeks ago, Vayidom Aaron, that Aaron was silent after his sons died. Right? That's his most eloquent moment. Right? All the rest of it is Moshe saying, do this, do that. If you want to say that Moshe was like giving sign language to Aaron and he was the one who was speaking, I think it's a stretch. I think as a lot of things get reversed, right? Sefer Shmot, we call it the book of names, right? What's the name? Who are the names of the main characters in the book? Moshe, that's not his real name. We don't know what his real name is. Paro, that's a title, right? Right? What's Moshe's real name?
Does Aaron say anything about Korach? I don't think so.
Aaron falls down on his face next to Moshe at the same time, right? And he says, "Oh, please, what do you?" And then he says, "Elohei Aruchot, why are you going to kill all these people?" So, but he doesn't step between Korach and Moshe.
Doesn't Hashem also get angry with Moshe because he keeps arguing with him?
Yeah.
Well, that kind of has an effect on you too.
It's kind of interesting.
Somebody that has this kind of power and they're getting mad at you.
But it's kind of interesting. God's getting angry at him, but he's still standing his ground. He's saying, no, dude, I don't want to do this. Listen, shalach shalach. Send somebody. Somebody else, not me. God says, damn it, you're the guy.
That's why I said he finally has to give in.
So we don't believe in any prophet who comes up after Moshe. Because we don't believe in any prophet just because they do like signs and wonders, right? So this is very, very important, very interesting. Okay, En anu ma'aminim bo mipnei ha'ot levado, right? Remember, so how do we know if somebody's a navi? How do we know if somebody's a navi? They come and they do signs and wonders, and then they give us a prophecy, and it comes true, right? So, but he's saying the fact that somebody does signs and wonders, this is very, very important. This is like Rambam, this is echt Rambam right there, right? Rambam is saying the fact that somebody comes along and does signs and wonders, that's not why we accept that person as a prophet. We accept that person as a prophet because we were commanded by Moshe in the Torah that when somebody comes and does signs and wonders and then tells us a prophecy and it comes true, we are commanded to accept that person as a prophet. And the example or the parallel to it is just as כמו שציוונו לחתוך הדבר על פי שני עדים. Just like we're commanded to make a legal decision in a Beit Din on the basis of testimony of two witnesses. Right? They may be lying. But if they are not somehow overturned, if their testimony is not overturned, or the Beit Din doesn't know for a fact that they were lying, right? Then the judgment has to go according to the witnesses. You know the concept of Edei Zomimim? Mm-hmm. Witnesses who come and say, oh, we saw you commit the murder here last Thursday on the street corner, right there on the corner of King George. And then two other witnesses come and say, you couldn't have seen him commit the murder on Thursday on the corner of King George because last Thursday you were with us in Tiberia. So the court accepts the testimony of those second witnesses, period. If a third group of witnesses come and say, no, they couldn't have been with them in Tiberia because those two guys were with us in Bnei Brak, forget it. That's case closed. Okay? So there's a halakhic process. It's very, very important, right? There is a reality that we have to draw lines.
That defines reality.
It defines the way our society functions, right? Because otherwise, if you keep on questioning things, or you're gonna, appeal after appeal after appeal, or what have you, right? So it's very important. He's not saying that if a person comes along and does signs and wonders and then gives a prediction and it comes true, that person is a Navi. He's saying we're commanded to accept that person as a Navi because those are the criteria that the Torah spells out for us. Very, very important. Let's finish this up in English because it'll be quick, right? Therefore, if a prophet arises and attempts to uproot or dispute the prophecy of Moshe by performing signs and wonders, we don't listen to them. We know with certainty that he performs these signs through magic or sorcery. Why? Because the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu is not dependent on wonders, right? As he said at the beginning, right? We don't know that he's a prophet because he did these wonders. They're divorced from that. We know that he's a prophet. We saw him go up on the mountain and speak to God. That's it. Chalas. We don't need any more than that. He does signs and wonders. There were things that were needed at the moment, as we established, right? There was no other way to give water to 3 million people other than to do some kind of miraculous thing, split open the rock, here comes the water. There was no other way to drown Pharaoh and all of his army except to open the sea and then close it on top of them again. That's the proof. And so that's a problem. I think one of the reasons that we read the Shira Shayam every day is to remind ourselves that if we persist in the status of seeing is believing, we got a long ways to go. Right? It's not about that. We need to have emunah that's much deeper than I have to see it to have it proven. No, exactly.
They captured this.
What's that?
They captured the terrorists.
Oh Hashem.
Yes.
Thank God. Great.
Most of them.
So just a side question.
Let's quickly, just give me a second to finish this up, please, okay? We heard it, so the prophecy of Moshe is not based on wonders, so that we can compare the wonders that he did against the wonders that, Chaim Yankel does on the street corner over here. But we saw with our own eyes, we heard with our own ears. To what can we compare this to? Witnesses who give testimony concerning a matter to somebody who observed the situation with his own eyes. They won't listen to them, right? If I see somebody, driving a car and drive right into and run somebody over with it, right? And then I see 2 witnesses, they say, well, no, he wasn't driving. I said, I saw it.
He was dead before.
Whatever, right. I saw it, okay? It's interesting halakha, by the way, that a person who witnesses a crime, the person who...
The eyewitness isn't reliable.
No, so there's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says the person who witnesses the commission of a murder cannot serve as a judge.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's because like in America, you can't, if you're, for example, if you're a victim of a crime, you cannot serve on that jury.
That's grounds to dismiss a juror, right? If somebody was a victim of a similar crime.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So therefore the Torah states in the Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy, even if a sign or a wonder will come, you should not listen to the words of that prophet. He comes to you with signs and wonders to deny what you saw with your own eyes. We believe in a wonder as evidence of a prophet's reliability only because of the mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu commands us. Therefore, how can somebody else do a wonder and cause us to accept this person who comes to deny the prophecy of Moshe, which we ourselves heard and saw and experienced? Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. Gewalt.